I got something I want to talk about. I've been seeing a lot of discussions on Facebook lately, and it's something that's always, I guess, it's kind of bugged me a little bit whenever I see people use terms the wrong way. And I've been seeing discussions about it on the internet quite a bit on Facebook lately. And I think I hit on this on one of my earlier videos, but like really small, really quick. So I figured I'd make a short video dedicated just to this subject. Let's go over the terms. Wild and native. And how they work with fish. Now, first off, everybody uses them incorrectly with trout, but this is going to go to any fish anywhere. It's not just trout. So, do I want to start at the hatchery or do I want to start with native? Let's start with a hatchery, because a lot of fish these days come from hatcheries, which in my mind is kind of a shame, because it means we screwed things up so bad that we need hatcheries. Or maybe there's too many of us that are just inconsiderate, selfish, who cares, take everything, that we need hatcheries. Or maybe the governments just depend on hatcheries to sell licenses. I don't know how it works. I'm not a big fan of hatcheries. They do have their place when you're trying to restore fish that have been lost, I suppose. But other than that, I think nature should take care of itself. It's going to do what it's going to do, and humans shouldn't try to control it. But regardless, we'll start with hatcheries. Hatcheries raise fish, stock them in waters. That's pretty cut and dry. That's a hatchery fish. A wild fish is a fish that is born in the wild. A wild fish is not necessarily a native fish. Just because you catch a fish that you're pretty sure is wild, it's not native. It's not what that means. Wild means it was born in the wild. So your state could dump a bunch of hatchery fish in a river or a lake, could stock that water. Those fish that were born and raised in the hatchery and then dumped in the water can swim upstream and spawn. The next generation of fish that come out of those eggs and populate the water, those are wild. But they came from a hatchery. They are not natives. Natives, on the other hand, and I'm going to use the brook trout because I'm from upstate New York, and brook trout are native. Everyone always wants to use trout for the whole native and wild discussion, and brook trout are native to the northeast of the United States. So I'm going to use brook trout. You could use whatever you have wherever you are. Substitute brook trout. You'll get it after I explain this. Brook trout are native to the northeast, and I'm going to go with the Adirondacks. It's where I fish. They're native in the Adirondacks. Just because you catch a brook trout in the Adirondacks does not automatically make it a native. What makes it a native is its DNA. And that DNA has to be a pure strain that has not been tampered with or combined with stocked hatchery DNA that doesn't belong here. That came from a hatchery that was produced in a hatchery. A native fish can't have any hatchery DNA in it, any hatchery blood. So just because you catch a brook trout in the Adirondacks doesn't make it a native. The only way to find out if it's a native would be to collect its DNA and have a lab do an analysis on it and tell you that, yep, we didn't find any hatchery DNA in it. It's a native fish. Other than that, you don't know. You can't look at it. You can't go, wow, that's a really nice fish. You see those marks there and see those spots or see the fit? That's not how it works. DNA is the only way to know. So stocked is stocked, period. Wild means it was born in the wild, but not necessarily native. Native means it was born in the wild. It's definitely wild. And its ancestors go all the way back to the last ice age as far as brook trout go. And nobody ever messed around with a hatchery fish in their family. Those are the three differences. I've got the Oriskany Creek out back behind the house. In the Oriskany Creek, there's a fish called the fall fish. It's a big minnow. Some people catch them. They think they're creek chubs. They call them suckers, whitefish, whatever. It's a fall fish. It's a big minnow. It's a native. Nobody grabbed them from another state and brought them to New York State and stocked our waters with them. And then they didn't spread all over the place. Fall fish have always been here. They belong here. They're natives. If you go out west, the brook trout that belong here in the Northeast do not belong out west. You go to the Rockies and stuff, brook trout don't belong there. They're an invasive species. Somebody took brook trout eggs from here, took them out west, and stocked waters with brook trout out west because, oh, it's a trout. People want to fish for trout. It's a game fish, whatever. But they're invasive. So just because it's a game fish and it was born in the wild doesn't make it a native. A better example than the brook trout is, and this is the one that always ticks everybody off, the most popular invasive species of fish we have in the United States. Are you ready for this? Some of you are going to know this, and some of you are going to be like, oh, blasphemy! The brown trout is an invasive species no matter where you find it in the United States. You cannot catch a brook. You cannot catch a brown trout, even if it's wild, even if it was born in the wild. There's plenty of self-sustaining brown trout populations, wild brown trout. You cannot catch a brown trout in the United States and call it native. They do not belong here. They come from Europe. They were brought here, fish eggs on ice, on boats, raised here in hatcheries, sent all across the country because they're a cool game fish. They're pretty. People would want to fish for them. They outcompete a lot of our native species, and they spread like crazy. I love fishing for brown trout. That fish was on the back of my first book, Reflections of a Fly Rod. At the time, it was the biggest brown trout I ever caught. Came out of the West Canada Creek Trophy section, which is a stocked river. It was a stocked hatchery fish. It wouldn't matter if that fish was born in the river. There's no way it'd be native. And that's how the whole wild native thing works. Hatchery comes from a hatchery, period. Wild is born in the wild. Not necessarily native, though, if its ancestors came from the hatcheries. Native means its DNA dates back to the oldest ancestors that were ever here. Native belongs here. That's how it shakes down. I am involved in an organization, a nonprofit called Trout Power. and we go up into the Adirondacks and we search for brook trout that either the state doesn't know are in the waters we explore, or don't know what strain of brook trout they are. We catch the fish, we fly fish for them, we catch them, we take DNA samples, the very top tip corner of their tail, we take a tiny little fin clipping. It doesn't have to be big, as long as you can see it, it's big enough, and they go in little vials of ethanol, and they get sent to a lab, and the DNA gets analyzed, and we find out if they're native species and we find out if they're native fish, and if it's a native strain that the state already knows about, or if it's a native strain that the state doesn't have any record of. We found 2 so far, one in the Adirondacks and one in the Tug Hill, and I'll bet that if you were to go through all the Adirondacks and all the waters and DNA sample fish that no one's ever sampled before, or places that the state doesn't even know they're there and has never cared that they're there, or no reason to go in and search for them and check their DNA, you would probably find who knows how many other strains of native brook trout that no one's ever recorded that strain before. So that's why I'm no scientist, but it's given me an understanding of the difference between a wild fish and a native fish. There's just no way to know that a fish is native without looking at its DNA. You can't pick up a fish and go, "Oh, that's a beautiful native fish," because it looks like a native fish. You don't know until you look at the DNA. So anytime you're fishing with somebody and they're like, "Oh, I caught a fish, it's a native." If it's a brown trout, well, that's impossible if it's in the U.S. If it's a brook trout in the Northeast, it's possible, but you don't know. That's just a guess that it's native. That's how it works. So I think this Sunday I'll probably be taking off because our trout season in New York State ends on the 15th. So time's ticking, and I want to chase brook trout up till the end, because after that, then I've got the creek out back, which is open to catch and release year round, and the West Canada stuff, and it's all for brown trout. And I can fish for them all winter, but the brook trout up in the Adirondacks, I can't. So I'm going to go chase some fish that I know are natives for a fact, because we have collected DNA on those streams, and we know that they're natives. But it's the only reason we know. That's how it works. So maybe this weekend I'll get some footage, talk about something else out on a stream someplace. Who knows, maybe I'll even catch another fish on film. That's happened once so far with all these episodes. And hopefully you learned something. That's all I got. So you know how this works. Do what you got to do. When you have to, call in sick and go fishing. Next time.